Joseph Ratzinger was born and baptized on Holy Saturday, April 16th, 1927, as the youngest son of Maria and Joseph Ratzinger Sr. When he was 5 years old, ironically enough, Joseph was with a group of young children when they saw the visiting cardinal. And upon seeing the visiting cardinal's distinctive robes, Joseph said, "Someday I'll be a cardinal." What a prophet. Now, unfortunately for Joseph, he would later be conscripted into the Nazi Hitler Youth, which he was unwilling, but he still had to go. And he would later also serve in the German infantry and anti-aircraft corps. Yet as the Allied invasion began to draw nearer and closer to home, Joseph and many of his friends deserted the Nazi military and they simply returned home. However, he was interned for a time in an Allied prisoner of war camp for a few months before he was released in May 1945. Later, both he and his brother George would attend seminary, and then they would both actually come to be ordained by, in fact, the same cardinal that Joseph had met as a youth, quite ironically enough. Joseph Ratzinger would quickly rise in prominence among theologians due to his prolific works that he would later write. And eventually he would become cardinal and later pope as the 265th pope at age 78 in 2005. Joseph Ratzinger, as Pope Cardinal Benedict XVI, made it his mission to combat secularism in the modern day and to return to fundamental Christian values. Now, he was a brilliant theologian as well as an effective pastor. And when I think of Joseph Ratzinger in particular, something that stands out to me is his view of purgatory. Now, I know that many Protestants are turned off to the idea of purgatory, but perhaps the door might be open through individuals such as C.S. Lewis and Joseph Ratzinger. So Joseph Ratzinger, in his book on eschatology, writes that purgatory ought not to be thought of as Tertullian did, as some concentration camp. Rather, it should be thought as some divine encounter with Christ himself. And in this encounter with Christ, all that is false in the person, all that is stubble and hay, shall be burned away in a total transformation of the person. Joseph Ratzinger, as Pope Benedict XVI, would continue this idea of purgatory in his papal encyclical, Spe Salve, in which he writes, quote, "Some recent theologians are of the opinion that the fire which both burns and saves is Christ himself, the judge and savior. The encounter with him is the decisive act of judgment. Before his gaze, all falsehood melts away. This encounter with him, as it burns us, transforms and frees us, allowing us to become truly ourselves. All that we build during our lives can prove to be mere straw, pure bluster, and it collapses. Yet in the pain of this encounter, when the impurity and sickness of our lives becomes evident to us, there lies salvation. His gaze, the touch of his heart, heals us through an undeniably painful transformation, as through fire. But it is a blessed pain in which the holy power of his love sears through us like a flame, enabling us to become totally ourselves and thus totally of God. The pain of love becomes our salvation and joy." In short, for Joseph Ratzinger, purgatory is not a place, it's not a punishment, it's not a presumption. It is a transforming encounter with divine love in the face of Jesus Christ. Now, Ratzinger would also examine notions of universal salvation in his book on eschatology. In this book, he would look at certain Catholic mystics who believed that the interdependence of persons meant that the loss of one individual was a loss for the whole. And drawing on the Buddhist tradition, the Bodhisattva, Ratzinger compares Jesus to a Bodhisattva. Now, in the Buddhist tradition, a Bodhisattva is one who can attain to nirvana at any point. But instead, he has taken a vow that he shall not pass into nirvana until he has brought every last soul through him. And so he will go through hundreds of narakas, which are Buddhist hells, to bring every last soul to nirvana before he himself will step in. And Ratzinger draws a parallel between these bodhisattvas and Christ. He says, quote, "And here we can point once again to Buddhism with this idea of the bodhisattva, Christ, in whom Asia's dream becomes true. The dream is fulfilled in the God who descended from heaven into hell, because the heaven above and earth, which is hell, would be no heaven at all. Here it seems that Ratzinger leans towards the view that Christ, in his Howling of Hades, is on a mission to empty Hades of all individuals, just as is the mission of a bodhisattva to empty narakas of all persons before they enter into nirvana. Later, at the funeral oration for Hans Urs von Balthasar, Ratzinger would say about this individual who believed that we should dare to hope for all, that he was right in what he taught of the faith, and that Balthasar points the way to the sources of living water. Yet at the same time, Ratzinger warned that, quote, there can be people who have totally destroyed their desire for truth and readiness to love, people for whom everything has become a lie, people who have lived for hatred and have suppressed all love within themselves. This is a terrifying thought, but alarming profiles with this type can be seen in certain figures of our own history. In such people, all would be beyond remedy, and the destruction of good would be irrevocable. This is what we mean by the word hell. On the other hand, there can be people who are pure, utterly pure, completely permeated by God, and thus fully open to their neighbors. People for whom communion with God even now gives direction to their entire being, and whose journey towards God only brings to fulfillment what they already are. Yet we know from experience that neither case is normal in human life. For the great majority of people, we may suppose there remains in the depths of their being an ultimate interior openness to truth, to love, to God. In the concrete choices of life, however, it is covered over by every new compromises with evil. Much filth covers purity, but the thirst for purity remains, and it still constantly reemerges from all that is base and remains present in the soul. What happens to such individuals when they appear before the judge? Will all impurity they have amassed through life suddenly cease to matter? What else might occur? As Pope, Joseph Ratzinger proposes these list of questions and asks the question essentially that Balthasar was asking is, dare we hope? Might it be that there are some individuals who are beyond hope, who would eventually say no to purity and give in to the impurity of the fleshes? We simply don't know. We cannot be certain of what may come in the future. But given these different thoughts that Ratzinger holds throughout the course of his theological career, I think that would be fair to say that Ratzinger is open and that he is hopeful for the salvation of all, that he thinks that it is a possibility, but we should not say with certainty that it shall be.